but I recall seeing it. And it was the first procession I think that I ever saw. And when I was 9 years old, I went to London for the very first time, and I saw the trooping of the colour, or something a bit like this, and it was about parades as an expression of power. It was about royalty and the British Empire. And now working with Walk the Plank, and we make work in public space, and some of the work that we make is parades and processions. And I'm going to give 3 examples. And the first is Manchester Day, which I think is about making a parade as an act of civic engagement. And it's been going, this year will be the 9th year of Manchester Day. In 2014, 13-14, I went to Ukraine and made a lantern procession, very small, you'll all recognise that, don't need to explain what a lantern procession is. And then last year in Lithuania, we were involved in designing a procession as an act of sort of community empowerment through a co-creation process. So I'm going to look at the method behind those 3 different things. And talk a bit about how we place our audience as participants or co-creators of the work. It's become trendy, that word, hasn't it? Co-creators. Notice how I use it seamlessly. But also think about how to create rituals, new rituals in public space. So, professionally and personally, I've been part of many celebrations that exist to reinforce identity, be that religious or spiritual, sporting or national identity. Last year, for John's 60th birthday, we went to the FLOI in Valencia, and so I put that picture in, in terms of religious identity. I would urge you to go, but at the heart of an amazing set of bonfires, there's also a very strong reinforcement of religious identity. 3 days of processions around the city. And I think, like many liberal English people, I have struggled with a sense of national identity, mainly probably because I haven't had to fight for it, and the whole idea of sort of national anthem singing and flag waving I find quite tricky. And then I ended up in Ukraine during the Maidan protests in 2013-2014, and that need to assert national identity and wave the Ukrainian flag as an act of defiance and solidarity. And I suppose I witnessed this protest with a growing realisation of how safe we are in Western Europe. And I think it caused me to think about what we do and how we can use parades and processions perhaps as a way of deconstructing identity, national identity, and offering instead something new and different that is about how artists working with communities can create new identities that perhaps bind people together in different ways. I don't know. Identities that are not necessarily defined by geography or history, or coming from a sort of political elite. Anyway, Manchester. Manchester wants to embrace its diversity, and the parade, Manchester Day, came out of you are, where you're from. Manchester is and always will be yours. And I suppose picking up from Morag this morning and thinking about this city as a place. And I think that we need to create new rituals to anchor contemporary communities, and maybe we can create communities of allegiance that are more temporary and more fluid, and perhaps more interesting. This Andrew from Handmade Parade and Kathy made that big puppet for loads of kids from North Manchester. I think, oh look, there's the, for those of you that don't know anything about Manchester Day, there's the facts, and there's the lovely bee. We're going to get so bored of the bloody bee, aren't we? Anyway, so I think that Manchester Day gives visibility. What we try to do is give visibility to groups that are perhaps often underrepresented in the sort of civic life of the city, and that might be LGBT communities, it might be some of the cultural communities, and I suppose there's an interesting thing in here about thinking about national and cultural identity and how the whole process of celebrating it. I don't have time to talk about all of that, but I'll show you these pictures. The city invests in Manchester Day for lots of reasons, and absolutely none of them are artistic. They invest because it brings a sense of civic pride, and because of economic return on investment, and because we, build a sense of cohesion, blah blah blah. But I think that the parade is it's also a way of taking the northern traditions of protest. The suffragettes began here, trades union movement, British labour movement, and using that sense of parade as a way of giving a platform to people who rarely access institutional forms of art and culture. I've written a very pompous thing here, but I'll read it out. Rituals encode our values as performative expressions of that which we find meaningful. I'm so glad that Barnaby's here as representing an academic institution. There is meaning in the work that we make and the way that we make it, and I think the process of making the parade is as important as the end product. And for those of you in the room that make parades, you are nodding, and you all know what that looks like. But that idea of creating an inclusive workshop space that is welcoming to the most vulnerable people or the most invisible people is actually as important as making an amazing big float or a beautiful puppet. The authoring of the work is sometimes done by an artist and sometimes by a group in a shared design process. And the execution of the artwork is often done by many people, and I think the sense of ownership is shared by everyone. In the public realm, the sense of ownership of space is often felt to be shared widely, but the reality, as Sophie was saying, the reality, and as Morag was saying, the reality is that space is owned by the private or the public sector rather than by people. I think with Manchester Day, different artists, and this will also resonate with you, different artists work in different ways. Some groups want to come every evening for 4 weeks, some groups want to turn up on the day, put a costume on and enjoy themselves. And I think whatever the level of collaboration, it's really important to try and be clear about what that contract is between the artist and the community group, and to accept that there isn't a right way along that those different processes of engagement. But I think thinking through, and maybe part of my role is to help people think through, you know, who's leading, who's guiding, who's supporting. In this instance, does that group want to be guided, or do they want to, you know, do they want to drive the design process, or actually do they want to let the artist drive the design process as long as they can get involved in the making? But I think the collective act of making together is part of the resonance of the parade, and that sense of ownership by everybody is what the audience see. This year, the parade took place 4 weeks after the bomb. 4 community groups dropped out, saying that they were nervous about being in public space, and we had to work quite hard on some of the other community groups to keep them involved. But it was also the year that for the first time we had the Pakistani Community Association were involved for the first time, and I think that, I don't know if anyone saw it, but in Albert Square there was this sort of amazing dance-off happened, led by this group that just went on and on for ages, and it was during Ramadan, and there was people, you know, these guys were playing and dancing and sweating, and they hadn't had a drink since before sunrise, and it was a sort of phenomenal thing. And I anyway, been speaking for 20 minutes, I think, have I? Yeah. Not yet, good. Okay, so it's not. Oh, that's the time. Right, it says 19:11. I thought, God, 19 minutes have passed, but that's actually the time. I think there's something about creating the parade and the city for that time, for that one day. There's something about making, trying to make the city feel how we would like it to be every day, but actually it's only like that on one day. And all of you that work in festivals, I think there is something about that sense of possibility, and the work that we do that is, this is how we'd like the world to be. We know that it's not like that, but that's what we're about. This is how the city could be. So, leaving Manchester Day and how we work on that, and taking you back to Ukraine. And so, in 2013, I ran away from Walk the Plank. I ran away from Manchester, and I ended up living and working in Kiev. And my arrival sort of coincided with the beginning of the protest in the Maidan, which took over everything. Almost every independent artist that I met was an activist, and I felt a need to make some sort of creative response to the. Up until Christmas, it was very euphoric, and then when after Christmas, there was the shooting started, and the whole mood in the country was very sort of traumatised. And I was there, and I was working with young people who were all saying mainly, I'm learning English with the British Council, which is where I was, in order to leave. I want to leave, you know, I want to go. And I found this quite hard. So I ended up thinking, well, what can I do? You know, what sort of creative response? And I'm someone that works with amazing teams of people here at Walk the Plank. You know, it's about, you know, bringing together to make extraordinary things happen. And I was out there on my own, going, right. So I sent for withies and tissue paper in a crisis. And I persuaded the British Council to, they've got a big sort of auditorium, and I persuaded, not an auditorium, what do you call it, where you arrive, an atrium. I said, could we take that over for a week and make some lanterns, and got some of the teachers there, who are all Ukrainian, but they're teaching English, to get involved. And so we made 100 lanterns, and it was a fantastically, what I loved about it actually was the fact that, because I asked the question, who should we negotiate with in terms of the city authorities and the health and safety and the event management plan? You know, I know about all of these things. And at the time, there was no police department, because the president had disappeared, and the country was in chaos, and nobody knew who was in charge. So nobody knew who could say yes or no to this parade. So we ended up doing it with not a single piece of, I mean, actually I did write a risk assessment for the British Council, but there was no, pretty much no support from the outside agencies, because there was no outside agencies. And we just wandered through the streets of Kiev with a lantern procession on a Friday night. And what I wanted to do was we walked up this amazing hill. Oh, and I'll just tell you about the band as well, because I think there's something here about breaking. I ended up giving them money. I realised that I needed some musicians, and I put something on Facebook, and I asked around, and someone said they'd meet me in a bar, and they met me in the bar, and they said, how many musicians do you want? And I said, about I don't know, how much will they cost? And they said, how much money have you got? And so I ended up handing over the equivalent of about £100 to a stranger in a bar, who said, right, that will get you, 6 musicians or whatever. And I said, that's brilliant, and it's in, 10 days' time, and told them where. And then walked away and thought, oh, God, what have I done? And anyway, on the night, 11 musicians turned up, half an hour before the allotted time, and played all the way up this hill, which is really quite a steep hill. And we got to a park at the top, and the young people all put their lanterns down in a circle, completely unrehearsed. They just put their lanterns down in a circle, and the band carried on playing, and then they just did this amazing sort of dancing that just went on in quite a frenzied way. And anyway, I suppose we didn't advertise the event. It wasn't for an audience, it was simply for those 100 young people. And when I say we didn't advertise, I mean I, because actually there wasn't a big organiser, there wasn't a walk and plank there. I did get Helen Davis as an artist to come and support me, and Sophie and Mike and various other people came out for the ride. Anyway, I suppose my role was to invite them to be active participants, and to I think it was Donna said something about giving permission. Sometimes people just need permission, and I hope that what I was doing was giving those young people permission to see themselves and their city differently for one night, and it made a big impact on them, I think. So my last example is more recent, and this is at the procession in Lithuania. We have been involved, and if anyone wants to talk to me about Creative Europe, I will. We're involved in a Creative Europe project with 5 European countries, Cyprus, Ireland, Lithuania, Bulgaria, and ourselves, still a European country. And one of these training schools took place in Kaunas in Lithuania, 2 artists in a small old working class neighbourhood in a city that is going to be a capital of culture in 2022, and it's got a lovely city centre and all cobbled and old-fashioned and whatever. But we weren't working there. We were working in this one area where 2 artists, Vita, who's a Lithuanian artist, and Ed, who's Irish, are based. And they were going on about co-creation methodology, and they wanted to bring some of the local residents from that neighbourhood into the training school. The training school, what we got the money for was capacity building for artists. It was about giving training to professional artists. And so when they said, actually, we want you know, whoever from the local shop and the bloke from down the road to be part of the training, I was a bit like, no, this is, you know, that's taking away from the artists. And they sort of said to me, there aren't actually that many professional artists in Kaunas, Liz, because it's really hard to earn your living as an artist, even in the capital city. And so people, you know, the notion of professional artist and non-professional resident is not very useful here. So I was worried that we'd reduce the impact. And I suppose note the contradiction in this, because actually, you know, I've showed you images about Manchester Day, which is all about empowering communities, and there I was being a bit protective of this space for training with Creative Europe. And I think I was a bit worried that people without the skills and training of professional artists wouldn't have the right approach. And there's also a thing that I think the post-Soviet landscape, there's often a lack of community engagement. It's quite a different landscape from that in Western Europe. The local artists insisted, and of course, actually, that training process that had half of the people there were people who define themselves as artists and earn their living as artists, doing a number of different jobs often, you know, graphics designer as artist and whatever. And the other half were people who do not. They run a shop, or they work in the school for kids with disabilities, or they do whatever, all sorts of things. And of course, what we discovered was a huge amount of talent within that community, and all it needed was a bit of sort of unlocking. So I'm just going to show you what, in the training school, we didn't make a procession. What we did was take people through some steps and talk about ideas and leave them with some techniques and some ways of working that they could then use to make the procession, which they did later in the year, and we weren't there for that. I think the important thing about it, there hadn't been an art procession in Lithuania at all, because in that Soviet landscape, it's all people's minds. If you say parade, they think military-style parade. And so the idea that people might get involved in a procession and make it themselves was quite unusual. And I suppose, I'll show you, this was there. So one of the things we'd done with them was, you know, sort of that, you'll recognise that technique, the leaf print technique with banners, and we'd done it as one afternoon session in our training school, and then they went out and did it with lots of different community groups. And it was, they're going to now, this is the first Samchi community parade, and it's the first, you know, it's going to go from strength to strength. And I would say, if any of you want the experience of going and working in Lithuania, you know, talk to me, because they would absolutely, you know, love to host artists from the UK. And I think I would really encourage people to think about internationalising your practice if you don't already know. I know lots of people do, and And I don't just mean touring and doing a show, I mean sort of working. So, what's the time? 19:24. Leave people with an idea. Questions? So, put something about artists have particular skills that are useful. They're great at giving permission to people to be imaginative. Artists are great at asking what if. What if we can disrupt ordinary life with joy rather than anger? So, final image. Hull in probably 2013, youth unemployment was over 40%, and we worked as artistic directors at the Freedom Festival for 3 years, and I suppose that how can we create work that engages, brings young people to the forefront? We ended up doing, we did a torchlit procession through the old town. We put a call out. About 700 people said they wanted to be part of this torchlit procession, and we ended going to the main stage, where in previous years there'd always been bands, and there were bands, but we'd also got. I asked Lem Sisse if he would read Martin Luther. It was the 50th anniversary of Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech. So, and it was the first year we were working at Hull Freedom Festival. So we took 50 of the young people and put them at the front of the main stage, and we had Lem reading that Martin Luther King speech, which is full on political rhetoric. I don't know if you've read it all. Everyone knows the first bit, but it's 17 minutes of really hard-hitting political rhetoric. And he read it, and they stood at the front. And I think it sort of it signalled to Hull that actually you can I don't know what it did. You can make directly political statements within the context of festivals, and do things that sort of disrupt what people are expecting. And I suppose that's what I'm interested in doing. And we don't always get to do that, but that's it. Any questions? I suppose my last point, because I forgot to, sorry, look, I've finished, but no, I haven't. I wrote this. The era of the festival, which only offers touring shows to tour around Europe, is coming to an end. Now I think our audiences, who are also our citizens, expect to be engaged. And this, I went to a conference, and somebody said, I think the era of the festivals, the French and Spanish model of festivals, which I think the UK has sort of started doing a bit later, but we were talking earlier about actually are there less platforms to put your work into, and we've got Without Walls, and it's what's it called? It's touring network, and it's core festivals, and I wonder whether that is over, that idea that shows tour around and turn up at festivals and do their thing and then go again. And my final thing is, if anyone wants to talk to me about Nigeria, then or West Africa, I think now we sort of need to be looking beyond Europe, and who are we reaching out to? And I suppose I've been lucky enough, because of that British Council experience, I am doing more work with British Council, and I would really encourage people to look at the Artist International Development Fund. I think the current round has just closed, or is just about to close, or you had to register by the 21st of February. But really look at it, and if you want help finding partners, because UK artists have to then work with a company or a host or a venue or whatever, but do think about doing that, because I think it's urgent and necessary. Any questions? Got 1 minute. Nance Garrett.
It's a question for the room, really, not for you. And it kind of, you mentioned about your experience of working with non-professional, working with the community and the community participating, and a concern that people who weren't professional artists didn't have the skills or the training to do it.
And I was wrong.
But my question is, what are the skills and the training that an artist needs these days, and where do they get it from? Because my experience is that, over the last 25 years, the way in which people get that training has completely changed. And so, and I work in an environment where Arts Council funded, we're developing quite a large programme where we're encouraging creativity from the people that we're working with, trying to develop the capacity of people in those areas to contribute creatively, and some of them to become artists as well. So there's that kind of false distinction, I think, now between, largely, and I'm saying this broadly, you might have gone to university or gone to an arts training school, done 3 years, come out, been on the touring scene, be really terribly well networked, and quite a lot of work there for you to keep extending your network and developing your experience. And that doesn't kind of exist in any way, shape or form. And, for professional artists as well, they're kind of having to get used to their, as it ever were, but, you can't rely on making your income from being a professional artist. So if being a professional artist means that's where you make your main income from, that's certainly a change. So I think it's really interesting. It's a big question in my work where we are supporting people to develop their creative skills and to take a role in co-production or in being artists. Is at what level are they remunerated, and what's that relationship between them? As I don't like this idea of community co-construction or participation as a way of not paying people or getting the arts cheaper, which is a kind of constant tension in that kind of work.
Definitely.
So.
I like your term of creative practitioner. Kind of.
And there's lots of different skills that go on in that, isn't there? So yeah, I think it's something for the arts sector to think about. And I don't know what new training models are there. I don't know what happens in art schools anymore these days, or in drama schools, or what people learn in that in terms of a community.
But are they about learning anymore? Aren't they about paying £9,200 per year? And I don't know.
So I think it was as much about whether the arts colleges were allowing room for experimentation and creativity, or whether they want to be much more rounded and blah, blah, blah. But I didn't go through an arts education, so I don't know. So I came at it from a different point of view. Apprentice, I guess.
Isn't there a danger of saying that the arts festival, I know what you mean, is dead, because I think anyone who's on the ground doing it to an audience knows that actually the audience doesn't think it's dead. So the danger is, I think, that people who have to get the money out of higher up places, you are obviously seeing a picture that maybe I'm not seeing because I'm not rubbing shoulders or doing that. But I think there is a danger to kill it off before it's because it isn't. But if you want to do that, the touring circuit, you're not going to get as much work. But it doesn't. I think there is. It's not one or the other. I think there's a middle ground.
It's about how did those festivals come about, and I suppose they came about because some people who were movers and shakers and had a belief that it was a good thing to do. So it's almost like a principled thing, isn't it? It's what is culture and where can the culture develop, and people like Jeremy and various other people who've come up in the last 30 years in this country saw it as an exciting thing that they felt was, I don't know, it's a valuable thing. But if that's now, if it's really just about funding, and we're definitely heading into a kind of period of lack of funding, and that's about decisions are made as to what money there is, where does it go, and if the arts is an area where you think, well, we can dispense with that because we need it more urgently over here, that's what's happening. So it's a bit about principle. We think it's really important, therefore we'll siphon a bit of money over here because we think we must keep the festival. Or is it about pure austerity? Or is it that the audience, like Edward said, I think the audiences still love that work. And in some ways it was often too popular. There were too many people for what we could offer. So it's like there's a huge demand there still, but maybe principles and just isn't there anymore.
There's a degree of shift, isn't there, because there's less local authority. There's less local authority money, but there's also the 1.2 million Arts Council funding without walls. So there's
less local authority staff to carry it out. There's no event officers, there's no community engagement officers to go and help you get your community engagement.
I think that for me,
there's no town centre managers to actually work with the businesses, and that's where a lot of that lack of capacity. I mean, we're continually told by Arts Council to pull groups of people together to bid, because we're in an area where they say we want to give money into that area. But the challenge of pulling together non-professional organisations to make a bid and then managing that is a big challenge.
It's a bit trying to shore up what is, it's trying to shore up the lack of funding that's now in
but it's not happening in the right way.
I don't think the Arts Council's going to really be able to do that.
And lots more expensive to do what we do, which is buy in event management on an ad hoc basis and have a permanent event manager for a district.
And what I would say with Manchester Day, what I've noticed is that we have to do more sort of, 9 years ago there were youth workers, there were neighbourhood officers, there were people who could stand between the artists and the community groups and just do all of that sort of facilitating. They've all gone, and now we have to spend more money on the sort of project management that is about getting the group, just helping them get to the space, get there on the day. So we're now spending budget on that sort of infrastructure to support those community groups, because the groups that we want to work with are often the ones who have absolutely no, they haven't even got anyone supporting them apart from some overworked amazing volunteer who's doing it all. And that's Emily, you're sort of nodding like that resonates.
With the groups and it's also the individuals, how do you, because there's no youth groups, there's no, like, maybe there's kids or adults came as an individual and all those groups have gone, how do you get to those people?
Shall we stop? Because there's
we're moving towards food time, which I think we're probably all ready for. But just to say, well, it's fantastic, this marrying up of ideas about social and political change with practical, supporting groups to but also to acknowledge that you just hot off a flight from Agra or somewhere, and how you can switch from one thing to another and feel all that. So thank you very much, Liz. So we move into food again.
And the bar's open.
And the bar is open.
The bar's open. Look at that man there, just waiting, ready. Nancy's first up there.
you have these It was just brilliant. Sort of stressed protest. Doing
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Glass of red wine. Thank you.
Mind you, I think we need to come to that next one. Retain the It's going forever. You see that on Scud all the time. That's periods of time. When somebody sends something on, we're doing this project, anybody wants to get involved. I actually go to great lengths because there's a continuum. One thing or another. There's a continuum of experience. I didn't. Still really
The art of international
and on one level, you see, for me, it was different. I went in job street. But I just drives me mad that Scud one. Like I don't.
so amazing. Do a bit of research.
There's only and it's such a clear line.
I don't know.
You end up with more money.
What's your role with creative service?
But it may not. Actually, almost They got snowed in for now.
Yeah.
They're not here.
I'm not sure there is
There's two people
Do you want them full time?
Yeah. If it's East Africa, I know arts manager, I just met in Nigeria, I met their arts manager for she did a presentation about East Africa. She did where East Africa scholars in British Council developed places to be and so sub-Saharan but they don't work. That's a magic. Making